insurance. I'm already falling asleep, so we gotta like, you know.
Exactly.
And just to be clear, if I do get a really difficult question, that's the beauty of a virtual world. I can always just have a technical issue and just drop off. So,
The interesting thing about Chubb is you always hear about there's all these insurance companies and then there's Chubb. And it's like Chubb will go far and beyond and cover absolutely everything.
Yep.
Rebuild your house from the ground up, you know, whatever the case may be. So it's always interesting for me to, I want to kind of.
We had a client who had a home in New Canaan. He went away for a couple of weeks, went back to his apartment in the city, came back. The whole second floor had fallen into the first floor because of a water leak. And they were put up in a very nice hotel for quite a while, but
yeah.
that ended after a while too. But there's lots of stories, and Chubb does take excellent care of clients and quickly, I should say. And that's a lot of times really, really valuable.
Yeah, and that's something that we really pride ourselves on. And you know, as the organization has continued to evolve, that's been a constant and something that really is important to us to maintain. So.
All right, it's 4:02, and I think it's time to get started. And with that, we'll start. And what I've heard already from Meredith is that what we really want out of this hour is a little bit of education and a whole lot of stories about people on Park Avenue having disasters strike them and how you, John Allen, ride in and rescue them. And then I also want to introduce my other guest, Phil Horrigan, who, when that guy in Park Avenue says, "I don't want to live here anymore," Phil Horrigan marches in and says, "I can help you with that." And so with that, let's start with John Allen. Why don't you introduce who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thanks for having me, John. So my name is John Allen. I am a vice president at Chubb Insurance. I'm the New Haven office personal lines manager. The New Haven branch covers the entire state of Connecticut, as well as Western Massachusetts. We're one of the largest Chubb branches for personal lines in the country. And we have the pleasure of working with some really terrific agents such as Rand Insurance, who's also joining us on the call today.
Yeah, just for a little, if people aren't familiar, Rand Insurance is based in Greenwich, New Canaan, and Darien. And we have a really great relationship with Chubb. We're actually one of their top independent agencies in the state of Connecticut. And that's something that maybe some of the realtors may not really understand. When you're dealing with a Geico or an Allstate or a State Farm, you're going directly to a company that's helping you with your insurance needs. When you're dealing with a company like Chubb, you have to go through Rand Insurance or an independent agency to work with them because of the higher quality of the coverage, the higher quality of the service, and the values there. And John, you can add to that if you want. But
so does that mean that I get an agent? There's the perception that I need an agent to go to bat for me. Is that what you guys do? That I say, "Hey, I don't like this situation." You're just like, "I'll have a conversation with John. I'll make it go away." That's what happens? In
a nutshell. But John, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, we certainly have a very collaborative relationship, and we do work through issues as they arise. I think that the primary value of folks like Meredith is really in that trusted advisor role that they play to the client, in walking them through some of the intricacies and some of the questions about insurance, some of the misperceptions perhaps that people have, and just giving them a deeper understanding of what coverages they really ought to have and why. I think that's so incredibly important.
So
yeah, we're also a resource in many ways, as like John said, an advisor.
So I had an experience with this. I'm a military officer. And so a long time ago, I was with USAA and a tree fell on my house in New Canaan, and somebody in Texas for USAA said, "Oh yeah," they looked it up on their table and they're like, "Yeah, that's a $2,000 problem." And I said, "You can't get anything done in New Canaan for $2,000. Are you kidding me?" And I pull out a slate and show it to them in the days before Zoom. And they're like, "Yeah, but the table says $2,000. And so I learned firsthand the problem of dealing with somebody in another state who's never seen my house and doesn't really know what it takes to fix a slate roof in New Canaan, Connecticut. I think the starting price on slate roofs is like $200,000 if you can match the slates, right, Scott?
Yep.
Okay, see, I always look to my builder.
Well,
How
I mean,
much did you
obviously, it
get?
depends on the size of the house, but it's expensive. It's a lot of money.
How
No,
much
John,
did you
you-
get, John?
John, you bring up a great point. One of the things that we find when working with Chubb and the value of working with a local agency is we know what the weather is. We know when there's going to be a flood or a hurricane. We actually are talking to our clients before a hurricane happens, giving them some suggestions on how to prepare. But Chubb, and John, you can add to this, knows each market and manages it based on how much stuff costs in that market.
We do, yeah. So we do spend an enormous amount of time talking to construction companies in each of our territories, looking through the claims that we've had in each of our territories, and our square footage and our replacement costs reflect the realities on the ground in a particular spot, as opposed to just sort of a national average or that kind of thing. We're very particular about that.
So what do we need to know as agents? So Roberto's there, I'm here, we're agents, and we think, okay, we get it that you guys are the gold standard of insurance companies, but beyond that, I mean, how can we be helpful to our clients? How can we be helpful to ourselves besides the most rudimentary understanding of insurance?
I'm going to start with that, and I'll let John add to it. But the bottom line is you need us to help your clients have a seamless experience so that the mortgage situation goes through and so you look good, and how, we're helping you have a seamless process. And one of the things that some of my centers of influence, like John Engel, might say to a client is, hey, you know what, I recommend Rand Insurance, or go out and get a couple different quotes, but you're in a different market right now. You're in a different level than a home that might be $500,000 or what have you. If you're in a home over $1 million, we recommend working with the independent insurance agency who can provide you with quotes from Chubb or Pure or AIG, and working with the Geico and the other ones, that's not where you should be, because you're not going to be getting the quality coverage. It's very black and white with those types, but the quality of service is really what differentiates us. And John, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think you make a great point there. Chubb is the premier insurer of the successful client. We really invented that market space in the insurance industry, and have tailored our coverages and our services to that clientele, and have a 40-year plus history of doing it. And I think the folks we deal with, wherever they may have started, have come to a point in their life where they need something different, a differentiated level of service and a differentiated level of coverage. And that's really what we provide. It's not the sort of cookie cutter. It's very unique to their needs. And we have a great deal of expertise there.
And I think also I'd like to add, you really find out how great your insurance company is when you have a claim. And John, for example, when your tree fell on your house, you were probably not too happy about it. When it happened, your bill probably went up the following year if you actually made a claim. We try to guide people so that they don't go down the wrong paths or don't do something with a knee-jerk reaction too. So there's a lot of different ways we approach things to provide the service and the value. And as I said, you don't find out how great your insurance is until you have to file a claim.
And with that, I guess I'll do a claims example. I know we talked a little bit about that. And I think, Meredith kind of started out by telling a story about somebody on Park Avenue who'd suffered a loss, and we put them up in a very nice hotel. That's an important part of the coverage. It's what we call ALE, or additional living expenses. On the Chubb contract, it's uncapped. So whatever it takes to get you back into your home again, we'll pay the out-of-pocket cost to put you up until you can get back in again. A couple examples. One recently in Fairfield County, very large house, had a very unfortunate fire. We ended up renting a house for the client at about $50,000 a month. And he's going to be in that house for quite some time. Another story, this is from years ago, but it was in New Jersey. He had a fire, happened right at the beginning of the summer. It was a very tumultuous period of time. Family had children. And they said, we don't really want to put our kids up in some rental all summer. We want to send them to camp. we paid for the summer camp for the 2 kids because they wouldn't have been sending them to the summer camp were it not for the fact that they were displaced for this period of time. So it's a very broad coverage. It's an unlimited coverage. And those are the types of things you get with the Chubb that you don't get with a lot of the standard markets out there.
I wanted to ask Scott to chime in a little bit. I'm sure he interacts with a lot of rebuilding when a house is on fire or has a flood or whatever. And what's important, and correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, but you're really looking at the architectural designs, you're replacing the molding exactly the way it was, and those sort of details, which are really important to a lot of people.
Correct. It's not everything was created equally. And if you have a 1970s Dutch colonial or something, the level of detail is far less than what goes into a lot of these houses. And so at the very high end, replacing in kind can get to be very expensive, and disassembling and reassembling, making sure you clean. In this one house we're doing right now, I mean, literally between the floorboard and the bottom of the base is a little bit of a gap that smoke gets into, and you've got to get all of that soot out of there. And how you take apart well-crafted millwork, clean, and then put it all back together again is a wildly different scenario than in most normal houses.
So maybe John Engel, one of the pluses of guiding your clients to a high-end insurance company is so that when you need to find them a $50,000 rental, you got something new to work
They
with.
don't usually ask their realtors. They really don't. We don't step up and suggest, and we don't have an expertise. And that's what one of the things I'm hoping to get out of today, John, is, everybody says, we'll take care of you. And so, it's hard for us to say that the carriers are different, or even the agencies representing the same 3 or 5 carriers. We're not talking about Geico. We're not talking about Allstate in this area. We're talking about 3 or 5 of the key.
You'd be
carriers.
surprised how many people with $1.5 million homes come to
Yeah,
us.
but I don't sell houses to those people. So, that's really not my
Some
concern.
of your
So
colleagues,
how do I differentiate between all of you blue chip carriers and, if you've evaluated my house, how do I know that I'm paying the right amount? Because a lot of the time, I don't think you guys even send anybody to check it out.
We do. Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to say, obviously things have been done virtually over the course of the last 9 months or so that we've been living in this quarantine world. But yes, we have an entire team of folks who go out and appraise houses. We will occasionally, for some of the smaller valued homes, farm something out, but generally it is all in-house staff working with Chubb numbers and that as I said before, are derived from working with construction companies, from going through claim information, things of that nature. So you do get a real level of expertise coming to your home and evaluating it inside and out with the Chubb. So that is really truly one of the services that we provide. And I think it touches on another thing that people, and realtors in particular, should be kind of aware of, is that difference between market value, assessment value, and then replacement costs on an insurance basis. We're coming at it from, if your house burns down tomorrow, what's it going to cost to rebuild this thing from the ground up again? Not the fluctuations of the marketplace, not what a tax assessor may say that this is worth. Truly what it's going to cost to replace your home when it's done.
Are you also insuring the interior furnishings of?
Yes, contents are generally insured at about 50% of the value. It can go a little higher, a little lower, but generally that's the rule of thumb for your contents. So it's important to take stock of that as well. And Meredith can kind of talk to you a little bit more about that. But we can also, so things like fine arts, jewelry, collectibles, we can actually schedule separately, so you make sure that you have the appropriate level of coverage for those as well.
So if someone has $1 million painting on the wall, they can get up to $500,000 of that?
They can get $1 million. They get actually more than $1 million for that painting if something happens to it. And that's something you're going to want to probably schedule as what we call a VAC, or valuable articles coverage. The benefits there are a couple things, but principally there's no deductible, there's worldwide coverage, and it doesn't count against your contents coverage. So, if you have a $2 million house with $1 million of contents and you lose that painting, that's all your contents. But if it's scheduled separately, that's a different pile of money that you're pulling from.
And
So
to add to
Scott,
that,
hold on. Scott Hobbs tells me that his price of lumber and everything else has gone up like double or triple in the last couple of years. How have you guys been keeping up with that? Because if his replacement cost has gone for, let's say, $300 to $400 in the last 2 years, are my insurance premiums going to go up? Am I going to see that?
You are, and I'll tell you, it's something the entire industry has really been dealing with for a number of different reasons. And we can kind of talk about some of the underlying causes and some of, what that pricing looks like. What I would suggest, every insurance company does what we refer to as inflation guards. So every year, let's say it's 5%, the coverage, the value of your home on your policy, your replacement cost will go up, say 5%, 3%, whatever the number is for your particular area, to account for some of that. My suggestion, and Meredith, you can tell me if you use a different guidance, if we haven't seen your house in 5 years, 7 years, something like that, and it's simply been rolling on inflation, it's probably time to take another look at it to make sure that, one, the amount is not higher than it ought to be, and two, that you're not underinsured on something like that. So every 5 or so years, I would say, is probably a good time to revisit that.
Scott, how much has construction costs gone up in the last 5 years?
It's tough to say, especially over this last year. The reality is depending on what you're doing, the cost of apples to apples has remained actually relatively consistent in this area, because there was actually sort of a decline inside of some of the construction work going on. That what people expect has gone through the roof. You have some things where, like, you have light fixtures where it used to be you do incandescent. Now you really need to do LED fixtures. And then certainly under the COVID timeframe, lumber prices are up like 50% year over year right now, if not more. And there's certainly spot shortages in different places. So there's two factors. One is apples to apple replacement. And then the other is actually, what do people want today versus what they wanted 5, 10, 20 years ago. If you go back 10 to 15, it's very different.
On that same note, to Scott's point, for realtors to be paying attention to security alarms, generators, other little features like that would be very useful in the sale of the home, and to highlight is also going to help that client do well on the insurance piece of it, because those features of the home are going to help with maybe giving you some discounts, even though Chubb, everyone thinks is expensive. But when you start to pile in, well, we have an alarm, we have a generator, and these sort of additional things, it's only going to help.
What I would add to that too, and I think Meredith makes a great point, is water detection and water flow stoppage systems. One of the biggest issues facing the insurance industry has been the non-weather water loss, for two reasons. You get big houses, they have more plumbing, they have more opportunity for water losses to take place. What we've also seen, particularly in places like New York, where you have large pre-war buildings where the plumbing is just getting old, you have people packed in very tightly, and so the losses are becoming, very, very sizable, and the frequency is increasing pretty dramatically.
Why is Roberto's pre-war building particularly expensive?
Yeah, so I mean, because the plumbing does not last forever, and eventually things start to go. And when you have a building where people are living in close proximity to one another, if somebody living above you has their plumbing have an issue, you're going to have that problem. And we're seeing it more and more. And I don't say we, just meaning Chubb. I mean, as an industry, we're seeing it more and more.
Do you want to talk about flood, John, in terms of what realtors need to pay attention to there when they're working with their clients? And then we can switch over to Phil if you want.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things, unless a bank is requiring flood, I think typically people tend not to think about it, particularly when they're in a flood zone B, C, X, the lower risk flood zones. But about 20 to 25% of the flood losses that take place on an annual basis happen in those places for a number of reasons. And, you know, in a place like the Northeast, where we're seeing increased precipitation, we're seeing, you know, the snow and melting and all that kind of stuff, the potential for flood, even in these non-coastal areas, is really high. And I think it's, you know, it's something that people don't often think about. And carriers like Chubb do offer flood with a broader level of coverage than you're going to get from a national flood insurance program. It's relatively inexpensive in those areas, but it's a good coverage for people who may not be thinking about that because, gee, I don't live next to the ocean or you know, a river or something like that. Well, that's not the only places that flood losses happen.
I often tell realtors, if you are about to list a home that's on the water in a flood zone, check in with us. Let us give you a little sense of how much the insurance might cost your client if they choose to buy that home, because a lot of times you can transfer the insurance of the current homeowner to the buyer, but sometimes the person that owns the home doesn't have flood insurance, and the person buying it has to get a mortgage, and the bank's going to require flood insurance, and that can be very costly. So those are some budgetary issues that I think the realtors really need to ask their clients when they're working with a flood zone situation.
What about
I was hoping to get some good anecdotes. Go ahead, Roberto, but I want Scott Hobbs and John Allen to think of their best anecdotes.
I want to hear that as well. But I just have a question with regards to, I have a client who has a house in Southampton. He's not in a flood zone, but he has insurance, but he seems to be having trouble getting insurance for anything that's below ground, like in his basement. He just can't get coverage on anything, any of the contents down there. Is that, I mean, typical?
John?
So generally what we look for if something is in an area like Southampton, which we would consider, even if, you know, it's a coastal town, even if the particular location isn't, we do tend to ask for elevation certificates and making sure that all of the mechanicals in the house are above that. I don't know what this client's situation is, so I can't say for sure if that might be the issue or not. But oftentimes that is. It's a improperly elevated house that gives insurance companies pause.
My colleague Brendan O'Brien is on the call here, and he works directly with a lot of our clients that are in flood zones. Brendan, I don't know if you want to come off mute and add to that if you're able to. I don't know, I think you're driving, but I'm not sure. But Brendan has a lot of experience with our flood clients and literally goes to their homes and talks about that exact subject, Roberto. Brendan, are you there?
My neighbors on the water in Norwalk did not get covered in Sandy. I did not get covered in Sandy. The insurance, Hurricane Sandy, the insurance adjuster came out and said, I'm sorry, we don't cover waterfront homes for water damage. We cover you for wind damage. And I was like, well, it was really windy. Hurricane Sandy, very windy, not just watery. And he said, yeah, in his expert opinion, this is definitely water damage and you're not covered. And I'm like, well, what's the use? And I have to tell you, I stopped insuring that house. And I said, I guess this little beachfront cottage is uninsurable. And I'm sure my neighbors did the same because the premiums went up and the carriers wouldn't pay. And I thought, you know, so I lost faith in the insurance industry. I can't say it was Chubb, but I lost faith in insurance after that storm. What can you say that would give me any more, reassurance that insurance is just a box I check and I should buy the cheapest I can because you guys don't pay anyway?
Yeah, Meredith, do you want to start? And I can take that too.
Well, the only thing I have to say is, as the marketing person at Rand, I would say, not a good idea, John. You want to get the right coverage. I can give you another.
I thought I had the right coverage, and then they didn't pay, and
Well,
they didn't pay my neighbors either.
Then whoever you had it with didn't do a very good job for you.
Yeah.
How do you know?
Because yeah, it's an interesting, I always say, and I said it earlier, it depends on, you find out how good your insurance is and when you have a claim. And a lot of people just don't get it. And I can tell you a story about a client who son got in a car accident. The family of the daughter of the girl that was in the car sued. Chubb was their insurance company. They paid for the millions of dollars of legal fees. I mean, These are just things that you have to realize the value that could happen and you could go bankrupt if you weren't insured properly.
Does that mean we don't need umbrella coverage?
Yep.
So John Bainton, see all that water behind John Bainton, John Allen? That guy,
Yes.
everything John Bainton touches is you know, is
In a flood
vulnerable
zone.
to water.
Yeah.
So talk to me about all that fabulous waterfront behind John.
We do write a heck of a lot of stuff on the water all over Connecticut, Florida, you name it. So we are certainly not averse to writing waterfront homes and that sort of thing. And with an understanding that successful clients tend to gravitate towards beach houses and places that are warm and near the water. You know, as I was saying before about, you know, elevation certificates, we may ask some different questions. We may require some additional information. But, you know, in the New Haven branch, which I said before, handles all of the agents that we have in Connecticut. Our second largest state that we write business in is New York, and our third largest is Florida. So, I mean, we write a ton of stuff, and most of those are secondary homes, waterfront homes, things of that nature.
What is the most common thing that you guys just won't touch? It's like, we don't insure that.
My beach house.
Any of John Engel's
John
locations.
Allen.
You guys,
Hey,
we have Brendan
John,
on.
it's Brendan O'Brien here. Thank you guys for having me. Just to respond, you know, Chubb looks at, I would say, 95% of the homes in Fairfield County. The only things that they really do not look at are things that are negatively elevated in flood zones. And that's becoming more and more of an issue because we have less and less companies willing to write these homes. There are a few that write it, but in general, it's becoming more and more difficult. And Roberto, you mentioned that you had a claim in Sandy and it wasn't covered, or your basement wasn't covered. The standard NFIP FEMA flood policy does not cover anything in the basement. It has to be on the first livable floor. So that's a standard FEMA policy, flood policy. It will not cover anything in the basement. Now, when you get a positively elevated home that Chubb will look at and will write their own flood policy, a Chubb flood policy, you'll get increased limits with Chubb, and you'll also get coverage in the basement. Now, you need an elevation certificate, and the home has to be positively elevated, and they will consider coverage, excess coverage. So it really is specific to each individual location, and we do run it by the underwriters to see if we can write it and get coverage.
Is positively
opinion-
elevated mean off the ground or in relationship to the 100-year flood mark?
It's in relationship to the base flood elevation, which is the 100-year flood mark. So you'll call me, and I'll look at your property, and I will pull the mapping from FEMA and pull your zone. And if your zone is a flood zone with a base flood elevation of 15 feet, you have to be above 15 feet for your home to be considered positively elevated.
And if
If
I'm
you
not,
have a basement,
and if
then
I'm
you're going
not,
to pay.
and I can't get that high, what happens then?
If you're not positively elevated, FEMA will still issue you a flood policy, but it'll be at higher rates than a home that is positively elevated.
Is it
So
worth
we've had
getting
five.
at those rates?
If you have a mortgage, you'll be required. I'm not a huge fan of flood policies, FEMA flood policies, because it's only $250,000 worth of building coverage. It's $100,000 worth of contents coverage, which must be on the first livable floor or higher. So you're not getting a great value for what you're paying in premium. If you're paying anywhere from $600 to $2,000, it's worthwhile. If you're paying $26,000, like I've seen some homes in our area pay for flood insurance, in order to get $250,000 worth of content, $250,000 worth of building coverage, it's probably not worthwhile. If you're
It's probably
required
not
by
worthwhile
your,
for anything behind John Bainton, which is, he's got the whole 5 Mile River there, Tokenique. It's probably not worthwhile in Tokenique, Darien. but it is probably worthwhile on Oak Island, North Carolina, or parts of Florida, right? I mean, this is designed for typical $250,000 houses because that's the limit of the coverage, right?
No, not necessarily. FEMA flood policies have been designed to be your first line of defense. You can get excess policies on top of the 250 up to the $1 million. So we do have a lot of clients that have the $250,000 FEMA policy, but then layer it with excess policies directly from Chubb or some of the other carriers that write it, so that they have good coverage. We say it's best for North Carolina or so forth, but the major flood that we've had recently has nothing to do with coastal. It had to do with Texas. And that's where the biggest flood loss has been in the last 5 years. It's been coastal and it's been Texas, and it wasn't coastal. So any home can flood. It's just a question of the coverage and how much you think and how much is worthwhile that you can afford to buy, and whether it's worthwhile the coverage. It is tricky. Flood is definitely tricky, but I would say what John Allen said, most of the people that are required to have it, buy it begrudgingly because they don't think it's worthwhile. But you do need to have underlying flood policy if you want to have excess flood policy on top of that.
And it definitely affects the budget for someone who's buying a home in the flood zone area.
No, I mean, there are people that get priced out of a home because they can't, the debt to income ratio doesn't match up because they've got too much that has to go towards flood.
Yeah.
Actually, I referred a client to you guys over at Rand, and Brendan took care of my clients. They're new residents to Rowayton, moved from Brooklyn. And Brendan, you probably remember this because this is only a few weeks old.
Will Robinson, right?
Yeah, he was in the flood zone, quote unquote. But he I think he contested it and was able to get out of it, and you were able to help him rebate some of his policy premium.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example. A lot of times when you get a mortgage company that looks at their maps and determines that this was in Rowayton, and they had that the property was in an AE flood zone.
Yep.
But when I pulled maps for Will, it showed that the house itself, the risk was not in the flood zone, just a portion of his property was. So then we went back to FEMA and got more detailed maps, and he went and got a survey done showing that the flood zone did not touch the house. So then the mortgage company said, thanked him for doing all the work, but basically said, okay, the house is not in the flood zone. You no longer have to have flood policy. So we canceled his $7,000 policy, and now he doesn't have to pay it. And now we ended up buying him an X-Zone policy, which is $572.
And Geico is not going to be doing that for anybody, I'll tell you right now.
No. And it brings up a point that we also see. 63% of FEMA's flood maps have not been updated in the last 5 years, which they're required to be. They just haven't been. So you do have these instances that, like Brendan was talking about. It's a real challenge.
Yeah. The last time FEMA published anything about their financial status was they were $23 billion in debt, FEMA. So, that kind of goes to show you if there's a major claim in Rowayton or Darien, I wouldn't expect to have a full payout.
It's 4:35. I want to pivot a little bit over to our second guest. And I know that a lot of people are like, I don't understand the relationship between these two subjects. But Phil Horrigan is the king of short-term furnished rentals. And it occurred to me when I was thinking about this last night, we're going to be talking about insurance. We're talking about people getting displaced. And while paying for it is one thing, okay, I've got an insurance company willing to pay me. But now I actually have to move somewhere, and there's a hole in the New York real estate market, right, Phil? There's a hole that nobody was filling in terms of helping people get short-term rentals. How did you fill it, and how's it going?
It's not just short-term furnished.
Yeah,
that's what he leads with on his webpage.
How's it going, everyone? Nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed the enlightening insurance discussion. Actually, I learned a lot. So, okay, so where are we? First of all, I've been an agent for 15 years. I was with Corcoran, and then I was with City Habitats before that. So I have such a huge amount of empathy for real estate agents and the work that they do, the value they add, and how literally the hardest working people, I think, out there. I created Lease Break because as an agent, I did realize there was a sort of hole in the marketplace. Because as an agent, I realized that these tenants that were breaking their leases, they aren't agents, and the burden was being put on them to market their lease breaks. You know, they'd go to their landlord and say they want to break their lease. The landlord would say, no problem, but you, tenant, are responsible for finding the replacement. And then often agents get involved in it. I mean, but it's not really an agent's core business. Not to mention the sublet that are out there, all these things. So what I decided to do was, the initial concept was to just create a marketplace for people who are getting out of their lease. Let's say they have 7 months left, 8 months left, and people looking for a 7-month lease, an 8-month lease. That was the initial concept. I realized pretty quickly though, that it wasn't just good for lease breaks, it was good for all short-term rentals. There's basically no one marketplace, or there was no one marketplace to go for rentals between 1 and 12 months that combines lease breaks, short-term rentals. Like a lot of agents knew about furnished quarters, right, Roberto? You probably know, like, you know, you go to furnished quarters in a couple of these places. Now they all post with us. So you go to one place and it's a free website. You could search by date, what have you. It was designed with real estate agents in mind, so you can search on behalf of your client, you know, for free. Again, so it's totally free. But also a lot of agents honestly don't want to deal with lease breaks. They want to deal with the $4 million sale. And so they'll send their clients to a very transparent website like Lease Break. They'll go on our site, they'll find their short-term rental or help get out of their lease or what have you, and then go back to the real estate agent. I mean, that's often what happens.
The majority of your inventory is not on StreetEasy.
A lot of our inventory, first of all, well, we have the broker's listings also on Lease Break. So we take the Revenue RLS feed, but correct, like the short-term rentals, our bread and butter, where we get more traffic than StreetEasy for short-term rentals. Well, that's why all these companies are posting with us, like these landlord short-term furnished rental companies, they post with us. Those listings are often not on StreetEasy, especially the lease breaks. Of course, as you guys know, StreetEasy charges an enormous amount of money just to be on the site now. So you're just not getting all the inventory on there, and most of the short-term rentals are on Lease Break.
Are your short-term demand, is that coming out of say insurance situations? I mean, where I've suddenly been displaced and now I need a 3 or 4 or 6 month fix while Scott Hobbs fixes my apartment?
I'm going to make it tie in really nicely for you, John. Yes, that does happen. Look, it's not the majority of the people that come to Lease Break, but no question, there are a lot of people that need a short-term lease for a number of reasons. One of them being their house went on fire, God forbid, and they needed a short-term place. But there's just so many situations: divorce, marriage, need a bigger place because someone's pregnant. You know, I mean, there's just, of course, with COVID, it's been unreal. I mean, we've had triple the amount of people posting lease breaks during COVID. And, you know, it's interesting because a lot of the people that are posting, sure, there's a job losses and that kind of thing. Of course, there's a lot of that. Unfortunately, too much of it, right? But there's also people that are taking advantage of the crazy, crazy low rental prices right now in New York City. I mean, prices are down 20% and sometimes even more just since the pandemic started. So what people are doing is they may be living in Manhattan. They're getting out of their lease in Manhattan, and then they're going to Brooklyn, you know, and so that's happening because they can get more space there, or they're even, say they're in a share. This is happening a lot too. They're in a room situation and they're paying $1,500 for a room, you know, meaning a shared space. And they're like, why am I doing that when I can now spend $1,500 and get a studio, which you could not do just a year ago in Manhattan, you know? So, I mean, it's really interesting, like all the different things that are happening. And of course, real estate agents also benefit, because I always say, like, as a real estate agent, whenever there's a lot of things going on, a lot of transition, that's when you want to be a real estate agent. There are people getting married. There are people that are breaking up. There are all kinds of things happening. And unfortunately, people upgrading, you know. So yeah, I mean, it's been exciting. It's been a lot going on the site.
Remind me again, when do I want to be a real estate agent?
Right now, during COVID. Now, I mean, look, obviously it's crazy. It's this crazy situation. But the silver lining is that there are some interesting things happening and a lot of different kind of situations. People upgrading, people realizing they can get more space for the same amount of money and that kind of thing. So I always would tell people, like, if you could upgrade, in a market that's down 20%, that this is when you want to do it. And I had a lot of success in the last financial crisis that we had. This is not a financial crisis, but the last crisis we had, 2008, in getting people to upgrade,
Are you having any clients who are parking themselves in short-term rentals while they get all of their liquidity back from perhaps a sale, such that they're ultimately prepared to make their next purchase?
Yeah, I'm seeing a little bit of that. I'm also seeing a lot of people that are, because of the pandemic, they just dropped everything and they just went to their parents' house 4 states away or whatever. And their apartment's just sitting here. And then after a few months, like say in July and August, all of a sudden they're like, I don't know when I'm coming back, because as you remember, people didn't, in the beginning, we thought it would be 2 weeks, then a month. And then all of a sudden we realized, oh, this is for the long haul. And so those apartments, a lot of them are just sitting now vacant, and those people are trying to get out of those leases. And yeah, to your point, Roberto, there are a lot of people that are just so unsure of what's going on that they're getting into short-term leases. And here's something really interesting, guys. I talked recently to a short-term rental provider, furnished housing. The way they used to make their money, these furnished short-term rentals, is they go to a big landlord and they would say, hey, we'll take 100 units off your hand. We'll pay for 3-year leases at hopefully a discounted rate, and then we're going to jack up the price on the short term. Right now, the short-term rate is almost the same as the long-term rate. It's phenomenal. So there's a lot of incentive now for people to not get 12-month leases, especially with all the uncertainty going on. So that's definitely happening too.
And what's the difference between Freely and Lease Break?
So I started a new website a year or two ago called Freely, F-R-E-L-E, which is actually the phonetic spelling of the word freely, like a river that flows freely. And that website was the reason why I started that was a reaction.
Is that because that other big river was already taken? Amazon.com.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well,
very well, very good.
I'll
I'm getting really dark in here. I'm gonna get really light here. I'm getting really dark. Yes, John, exactly. No, that's not reason. The reason is that Street Easy was doing a lot of harm, as those, I don't know what percent of people we have in New York City on this call and what percent we have in John's neck of the woods. But if you're a broker in New York City, you realize that Street Easy is essentially taking advantage of what brokers helped Street Easy build, and is taking advantage of all that goodwill from brokers and is just really giving it to brokers, really, really big time. And so Freely is in response to that. The idea is like a transparent, honest marketplace that will always be free, where the inquiries that you get on your listings, you don't have to ever worry about them not going to you for free. Like, we'll find other ways to make money, but we're always going to protect the broker's listing, as a sacred thing. And honestly, just I feel like,
or more like an MLS, because I think of the MLS as being a co-op, a cooperative among all the agents. And I think of Zillow as being a for-profit business that's often in competition with the agents. And so
it's something in between. Yeah, it's a good question. Something in between, because an RLS is obviously just the broker's listings, really, right? That's just the broker's listings if you have like an MLS, for example. And Zillow, not only are they just a for-profit, but there's a lot of very deceptive and very greedy things and deceptive things that they've done over the last few years. And so this is something that is not that. This is like, we started with the premise, it's a pledge on our site about how we're going to always bring transparency to the marketplace. So we have right now freely.com. It has videos of apartments for rent. It's a real focus on videos. It's really cool because it's a great way to just see thousands and thousands and thousands of available videos for rent in New York City right now.
You're doing what Street Easy kind of initially did.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
Were like, let me work with us. We'll help you. And then once Street Easy got purchased by Zillow, then it became a completely different model.
Yeah. And I agree with that. And that's the reason why when the pledge that we launched with, and I want it to be verbal. So because you have a certain accountability when you put stuff out there to the world and you put it in writing. And number 4 on the pledge is we would never sell to Zillow or StreetEasy, no matter what they offered us. And the reason why that's so important is that there's so many entrepreneurs, you know, I talk to a lot of them, and behind the scenes, they do stuff like this and they kind of whisper like, yeah, but if Zillow bought me, I'm out of here, you know, kind of thing. And to me, it's about principles. Like, so you have to put it in writing and say, no, it doesn't matter what they would offer. That's not the reason why I'm doing this, you know? I mean, we all want to make money, but it's not about the sellout, you know? So that's how I built my brokerage business too. You know, you could do things in such an ethical, honest way. You don't have to screw people, you know? This lighting is getting really weird here. I feel like I'm getting really darker and darker as we go. So yeah, any questions about anything? Or I mean, I want to mention one thing that might be I like to always try to add value if I can. There's 2 reasons why lease breaks are a lot easier right now in New York City than they've been in a long time, and one reason why it's a lot harder. The one reason why it's a lot two reasons why it's a lot easier. One reason is that landlords right now are very friendly. You may have noticed that landlords used to say, you want to break your lease, get the F out of here. And they would be really tough, especially in New York City. They're being really nice. Part of that is because you can't be evicted. At least that's been the case up until now, right? You can't be evicted. So if someone has lost their job and they can't pay their rent, a landlord is going to bend over backwards to help that person in any way they can, right?
Wait,
so they're
that
being
doesn't make sense. That does not make sense. First of all, you tell me I want to break the lease, and I don't think I can replace you. So I'm really nervous about having a vacancy for the next 8 months, 10 months, right?
Yeah, but you can't
Right,
evict
so-
them if they're not paying.
But if you have a tenant who cannot pay, and you know that they cannot pay, that's a 0 scenario. If you remove them, you at least may plausibly have the opportunity to rent it to someone else.
Absolutely. The other thing is, and the second reason, this is kind of sort of related, that lease breaks are easier. You guys probably know the 2019 rent law that was passed in New York State. And there was a clause that a lot of people don't talk about because it wasn't in most of the press. Like, they mentioned some other things about it, but there was a lease break provision in there. And this is a big deal for lease breaks because it was not the case for a very long time in New York City. But now the burden is on the landlord, where in good faith, they have to help you mitigate your damages. And then there's another little clause, which I've literally never seen this part mentioned. I don't know why, because it's so interesting. The landlord has to offer the rent of that place, like on the market, for either the current market value or the current price you're paying, whichever is less. In other words, a lot of landlords, what they'll do is they'll say, oh, sure, we'll help you get out of your lease. But kind of, John, like what you just said, the prices are down 20%. So, oh, well, sure, we'll help you, but we have to ask the same price that you've been paying us for the last 10 months, right? And they actually can't do that. According to the law, they have to offer it for the market rate. Now, the tenant may still be on the hook, though. The tenant may still be on the hook for the difference, but it's better than the tenant getting nothing. Like otherwise they'll have to pay the entire remaining months of the lease.
Bill, who determines the market rate?
I mean, right? It's so funny, but like all things, this has not gone to court yet. So I'm sure it'll get in front of a judge, and then that will all kind of come out of the woodwork. But it just says market rate, I believe.
It's like the assessed value of real estate.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's just keep that vague.
Yeah, exactly. And the one reason why it's obviously a lot harder to break your lease now is also what we've been talking about. It's just the pricing is so crazy. So if you're a tenant and you were paying $4,000 and now your place is worth $3,200 and you have, in some cases, a year and a half left on your lease. I feel so bad. Some tenants are posting on our site, they signed 2-year leases. They have a year and a half left and their place is worth $3,200 and they're on the hook for $4,000 a month. You know, in that case, even if the landlord would have offered for $32,000, you're still responsible for the $800 difference. I mean, it's really tough, you know. So,
all right, I want to spend the last 10 minutes looking forward. I want crystal ball. I want future. I'm fascinated, and I want it also from John Allen. I want to know, where are we headed for the next 12 months from both of you? I'm fascinated that you told me, and I'm trying to figure out mathematically why it's true, that the market is down 20%, because tell me if I'm wrong, Roberto, but most of our guests, most of your fellow agents in New York are saying that we're not seeing 20%.
This is rentals, rental prices.
In the purchase price.
I'm talking about rentals though.
When
Yeah.
you're talking rentals and you're saying
Rentals.
down 20%,
Yes.
I've got to think, well, first of all, that's got to have an effect on the for sale market. And where do you think it's going? Do you think that that's a short-term thing? And do you think that's a long-term thing? So give me your best predictions. And I want to know from John Allen over here on the left, I want to know what the prediction is for where we're going. I just heard that all the insurance companies raised their rates tremendously in the last year or so. And I wondered, is that's going to continue? So go ahead, either one of you.
Go ahead, John.
With regards to the sale market here, it has been like the air coming out of a balloon for the last 5 years. So it has been gradually readjusting itself. And there's been a lot of that was driven by policy. They raised the transfer taxes. They raised, everything you can even imagine, which
if I can get a killer deal on a rental, I might be tempted to go do that for another year before I jump in. I might.
But we're probably bouncing along the bottom of the sale market. And if you wait a year, you're going to be back into what is more typical of a New York market. And you will be competing with people. And the moment you're competing with others for property, the seller has more steel in their spine, and they are much more apt to not negotiate as much as you can get now. You have the leverage now, and you should participate. And those people who want to buy should be participating now, and they are. But the rental market could have some effect.
All those rental deals.
One thing that's really interesting too, I find, is that so the stock market is so forward looking. And that's why the stock market right now is already saying we got a vaccine, this is going to be over in 6 months, boom. But with real estate, a lot of it is just, sure, they try to look forward, but it's like what you're dealing with right now. So like you guys just alluded to, you can get these crazy deals now. I mean, I don't know, the rental market could really start to come up and increase in price. Once we have a vaccine, we have the spring and summer market, all these jobs will hopefully come back. So I mean, we could have a bounce back, so there is like a really good opportunity right now for rentals. No question.
We could, but do you think we will?
John, you're really pushing that crystal
I
ball.
am, because Yankee Stadium, we're not going to fill our stadiums. We're not going to fill our hotels. Tourism's going to take a hit for a year.
Yeah, I agree. I actually am not one of the people that believe that things are going to spring back like they did after 9/11. It's just not that kind of situation, unfortunately. I mean, I know so many people, I'm sure we all do, that have literally left the city. I mean, and every day there's more people talking about it surrounding me, and I see it on Lease Break. There's just been more and more people continuing to break their leases. I do think things will come back. I do think we're at the bottom now, but I think it's going to be a little slow getting back. That's my gut.
Methodical.
Yeah, that's my gut.
All right, John Allen, give me a prediction.
So I want to just be clear. You didn't mean to give the impression that all insurance carriers are raising their rates dramatically. However, loss frequency is certainly increasing due to a number of factors, not least of which changing weather patterns throughout the world. Two, loss severity is also increasing. And as Scott talked about, the cost of supplies, labor, everything else is driving that factor. So what I do think is going to happen in the insurance industry, there's not a carrier out there who's immune to these factors, and they're going to have to address them. So it's never been more important for clients to find a financially stable carrier who's experienced, who's in good shape, and who manages a portfolio the right way. And so finding value in a carrier is now more important than ever with these dynamics, because they're not going away.
I would agree with that.
John, I have a question. Sorry if I can chime in here.
Go ahead.
Nick Down with Law Insurance. Question with people leaving their rentals in New York City, buying a home in Connecticut, and leaving it vacant for 2 weeks plus to 3 months. Is that something, I understand some people don't like paying for insurance, especially if it's not going to be covered in the long run. You're paying for rental insurance in New York City. You buy a home, you leave it vacant. All of a sudden you have a loss there at home. There's a water backup, or maybe a mail delivery guy slips and falls and you have a lawsuit. A lot of companies would say that would not be covered. Is that something that Chubb would, for specific clients kind of look past, or is it kind of by the book, cookie cutter? And for the realtors, when you have a client that's buying a home in Connecticut and just leaving their location without breaking the lease and they still have liability exposure there, that's something that you'd want to talk to them about.
So Nick, I'm sorry.
By the book?
No, I don't think we're a buy the book company. So just to be clear, so the person still has a policy in place for the location. They're just not living there. Is that kind of the scenario?
Leaves it vacant. I'm just curious as well as to know how that coverage goes down.
Yeah, I mean, generally, when there's a vacancy taking place, we do have an expectation that you're letting us know via your agent that it is going to be vacant. In that particular scenario, slip and fall or that kind of thing, I mean, I can't imagine a situation where we wouldn't cover it. Could we cover it, or could we get out of it by saying, we were never notified that this was vacant? Probably, but that's just not the way Chubb operates. We would cover that claim.
Okay.
I think though that's an interesting question for my insurance guys. Is that the source of most issues? I would imagine that if I'm in the house and I have a flood, I can take action. I would imagine that freezing, floods, water damage, fire, a lot of those things probably do their worst damage when the people are not around. Is that a fair guess? Or
I'll say two things. We have a lot of clients right now that are at their second homes. They're in the Hamptons, they're up in Litchfield or whatever. And we are aware of that because that changes the dynamic of their policy. So if we're good communicators with our clients, we're finding those things out. We're asking those questions. To your point, John, absolutely. When someone's not there for a month, or they have a house in Florida and they're up in Connecticut for the summer, and there's a flood issue or a smoke issue or whatever, that is something that we are paying attention to. But it happens. There are ways around it. There are alarms and different kinds of water damage controls that we recommend. So it's part of the coverage.
I'm selling second homes to New Yorkers who come out on the weekends it's what I'm calling the COVID effect. They're coming out because they need to have a foothold in the country. And that's not like the rest of the houses I've been selling for the last 10 years. All these second homes are only occupied at best 25% of the time.
That's part of the way we do the coverage. It's a second home. We have some people buying second homes and saying, you know what, it's going to become my primary home. So again, shifting some of the policies and the coverage based on, because we ask, how many days a year are you going to be in your East Hampton house? Or how many days a year are you going to be in your pied-à-terre in the city? So those are part of the equation that we throw in the blender.
If you're with the Geico versus Chubb, they may find ways to get out of not paying that coverage. You go to a Golden Standard company like Chubb, you're a good client, you work with a good broker, they're going to obviously help you out. So that's important for, the reason for insurance brokers, and to talk with your clients to understand where they're going and what to do. That way, we can notify Chubb and we're all on the same page, versus just getting a policy through Geico and hoping it'd work in the end and then, it not.
That's exactly right. And I mean, it's very common for our clients to have multiple homes. So there's an expectation that they're not living in all of them at one time. So we do expect that there's going to be some vacancy going on.
If someone is not in the house as often, is that a premium because they're not monitoring the house, or is it less because they're not using the house as much?
Depends on a lot of factors.
Yeah.
So there's no correlation there necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, one way you could look at it is if, and John Allen, correct me if I'm wrong, if you have a home that has the different features that have indicators of a flood, or have cameras and things like that, there's some discounts that come along with that. But also I'm not really describing this well, but each situation is individually decided because of the features of the home or the security features or those sort of things.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't think there's a one size fits all that answers that question. I think it is really dependent upon the exposure that location brings.
So it's not like cars. Like, for example, I have 3 cars and I pay pretty much the same premium for all cars, but I can only drive one at a time.
Well, with cars though, one thing you can do is you can actually change the usage of your vehicle. If you're only, tooling around on the weekend in one of them, depending on what it is, you could insure it as a collector vehicle. You could change the usage to pleasure usage, which actually does bring down the rate a bit. So there are different ways to structure your auto policy that way too.
And a lot of people that used to drive, 100 miles a day to work aren't going there now. They call their insurance company and the next thing you know, their premium's lower because they're not driving the car as much.
Wait, what? Wait, what? Is that another benefit of the COVID that I could just call you up and say, I want my discount?
I'm not driving as much, so can you modify my policy? Yeah.
Yep.
Wow, I love that.
Yep.
I've got to make that phone call as soon as the Zoom is over.
John, you're driving
We're in
more.
the basement all the time now. Just
John uses
using
a
all
chariot
that.
to get from appointment to appointment. So
All right. So it's 5 o'clock. We should probably wrap this up. Parting words from my guests, and then Roberto.
All I can say is take advantage of your local insurance agent. Let them be your resource and advisor, and we'll guide you. And all realtors should have a friend in an insurance company.
I agree. The value of an independent insurance agent to a client is just immeasurable. And making sure they're with the appropriate company, a company like Chubb for the successful client is really essential to the financial health and well-being. So yeah, and thank you for the time here today. That's my
No, thank
work.
you. This was really great.
Thank
All
you.
right, Phil, I think of you as, the great disruptor, the guy who helps people get out of sticky situations. But I learned a lot today that, you found this great big hole in the market and you filled it.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. There, the other thing too is that we didn't talk too much about is because of COVID, a lot of people they don't need to be in the city anymore, and that's kind of sad. They're doing their work from other places. They don't want to spend the high New York City rents. And that's another reason why people are trying to get out of their leases. So again, it's great opportunity. If anyone's looking for a 1 to 12 month lease, it's a free website. I'm not selling you on anything. Okay. It's a free website. There is thousands, I think 5,000, 6,000 short-term rentals between 1 and 12 months on our website. Like the best deals I've seen since I started the company, for sure.
You guys have a branch in like Colorado and Florida, so we can all spend a month in different places.
It's something. What's so funny is that I was literally going to start a national company, and then the Street Easy stuff happened, and I got, as an agent, I can't even explain how upset. Roberto understands it. Got so upset that I was like, I have to do something about this, and so I started Freely, which you'll all hear more about in 2021. I promise.
I would be your client if you've got a place in Florida or Colorado.
Cool.
I have one question, Phil, about your business. So it's sort of similar to like the lease break in the automotive industry as well. Is that, do you guys?
Yeah. It's funny. When I started the company, I looked at, there's two big ones. Swap a Lease, I believe, right? Is an auto lease. And then Lease Trader, right? Is another one, I believe, right?
So it's my understanding though, that if you have a leased car and you break out of your lease, you still stay financially responsible for that lease when this new person comes in. Is that same for your residential model?
Is that how it is for cars? I thought you could assign the lease to the new person, then you're off the obligation, right? For a car
I've never
lease?
done it, so I haven't. My understanding was that you couldn't fully assign it to that person. That you still were basically financially responsible if they were to fail.
Well, what's interesting about what you just said is, if it's true what you just said, that the original car holder is still responsible, that's like a sublet, in New York City, where you're still. And so we allow, lease break is all those things. It's a marketplace. So when you go to your landlord and you say you want to get out of your lease, it depends on the landlord. Some will say it has to be a sublet, which is what you just described, where you're
Yep.
still on the hook as the current tenant. So they sometimes will say it has to be a lease assignment, where you're just assigning your lease to the new person and you're totally off the hook.
Mhm.
And sometimes they'll even say it has to be a lease break, which is funny because that's the name of the site. Most brokers just say lease breaks to mean all these things, but actually a lease break is legally, technically, where it's essentially like you're tearing up the lease really, and then starting a brand new lease, which some landlords want that. And some landlords say 2 of the 3, 1 of the 3, every landlord's different.
See, in Connecticut, we've actually had the rules that you are now new to New York City, right?
Yeah.
So I've always told my clients, hey, because they'll go to me and say, well, I'm starting a new job. I need to get a lease. We don't have many short-term leases in Connecticut. So you'll sign a 12-month lease. And they'll say, well, what if I get transferred in 6 months? I'm like, well, generally speaking, you can break your lease. Obviously, you want to give the landlord as much notice as possible. You're probably going to be on the hook for at least 1 month's rent, because that's the cost of that landlord to pay the commission for to find a new tenant in place. And then that's assuming that there's no gap, right? That you're,
Right.
you're leaving them on the hook for as a vacancy. But
Yep.
so like, is that what happens? I mean, who gets paid? Like how?
Yeah, so more or less what you just described is now how it is in New York City. But like I said, it hasn't been tested yet. And so some landlords are still holding out the way it used to be, claiming that the new law is ambiguous. When you say who gets paid, you mean as the broker, how do you get paid? Or could you explain what you mean by that?
Generally speaking, I mean, like you have to compensate the landlord, because the landlord's cost of doing business is generally speaking 1 month's rent, right? To get a new tenant in place.
Right.
And that's
well, okay. So here's the thing. You see, in New York City, the landlords, unless this other law passes, Roberto knows what I'm talking about. But generally, the incoming tenant, sort of all else being equal, they're the ones that pay the broker fee. However, the market's been so bad that the current tenant, when they're breaking a lease, they're responsible for paying that. The landlord, in a lease break situation, the landlord will not pay the broker fee, if that's kind of what you're asking.
Yeah.
The current tenant that has to pay, kind of what you said, I think.
Yeah, that's the lease break, friction cost.
So that's kind of how it is now in New York City for all practical purposes. That's just because the market's so bad, the current tenant has to pay for that 1 month broker fee.
But if they're going to a lease break website where it's free,
right,
and they're not going to use a realtor anymore.
Because so lease break is a marketplace where, I mean, look, I hope brokers get involved, but often they don't. Like it's a tenant posts the apartment and then another renter comes in and they just work directly with each other and there's no broker fees at all, right? So that often happens too. And a lot of it's because brokers are happy. They don't want to get involved in a lease break situation where there's 3 months left on a lease. Like, how are they going to even get compensated for that? Like there's 3 months left on a lease. It's like, it's such a headache for brokers. I know, I've done a lot of lease breaks. You could, as a starting broker, you could kill it in lease breaks. Don't get me wrong, but it is a ton of work. Like it's so much work to work a lease break. You're working the tenant and the landlord and the incoming renter. You know what I mean? Like it's just,
and nobody's
you know what I mean? Yeah. So although I will say,
do you have to sign disclosure forms on who you represent, Phil?
Or do you have to sign disclosure forms if you're a broker? Yeah, the tenants don't have to do that. If it's just tenant to tenant, you know what I mean?
No, but I mean, like if you're a broker interjecting yourself in that scenario, you have to have all that.
Yes, you do have to have all the disclosure forms signed. Yeah. And so one of the things, again, I don't think we have many New York City brokers on here, but we do have a program. This kind of gets, John, maybe to your point. We have a program because I believe so much in brokers and how much value they can add, that we have a program where we hook up a broker to help that transaction, because the tenant doesn't really know how to market an apartment. They have a full-time job. They don't take pictures. They don't know kind of what they're doing. So the broker helps them. And then that's where, Roberto, all that paperwork takes place. It's like an exclusive agreement, basically, between the broker and the tenant. And it's almost like how you have an agreement with exclusive agreement with the landlord, but you have it with the tenant instead, the current tenant,
Tremendous.
That's really interesting, because how do you represent the property if it's really the landlord's property, but you're getting hired by the tenant?
You're representing the tenant. So the agreement, instead of saying wherever it says landlord, it says tenant. It's
Yeah.
basically the same agreement. It's not about the property. It's never really about the property anyway, right? Like, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but your fiduciary is to the person, you know what I mean? So it's about the person that you then have to represent. You're
But-
representing the tenant.
But the landlord has to approve the new occupant.
Yes. So what happens is the landlord will often say to the current tenant, you can get a broker, no problem, but they have to come through me to get qualified. That's all. And the broker often stays out of it. And one of the reasons why so many landlords, thousands of landlords recommend lease break is because they don't want these listings, these lease breaks, to compete with their other inventory, which is having enough problems of their own, So they feel like, oh, here you go to lease break, and they'll take care. And then they feel like they're doing something by helping the tenant, but it's not necessarily going on Street Easy and all these other places,
Are you in
So,
Connecticut yet?
Not yet, but I talking to you, I want to get into Connecticut now. We'll work together, John, and that.
We haven't really had a seasonal rental market or short-term market until this year. And a lot of agents don't want to deal with rentals even on a good day, much less on short-term rentals.
So
We have a-
true.
We haven't figured out how to get paid for it.
John Bainton, would you agree we have a seasonal market and we're waiting, right?
Oh yeah, and I mean I did.
Waterfront has always had a seasonal market. Yeah.
Yeah, and in anywhere. I mean, I did a rental. I mean, I don't really do anything in Milford, but I took on like a $30,000 a month rental in Milford because it was beautiful waterfront and it was competing against the Hamptons. So I figured that that this is something easy to market, and I did it and rented it for 3 months.
Nice.
So and that actually is a decent commission to work off of.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
but it's definitely. I don't know. Rowayton definitely has it, and we always have the short-term need for constant construction projects, whether it's displacement from a fire or an accident of some sort, or if it's just, hey, I want to add a new addition to my house, and it's going to be 6 to 8 months. So I get a lot of inquiries from a short-term rental from those two feeds.
And where do they go, John?
Well, we try to work
Craigslist.
Well, no, I mean, I feel like from my experience, you kind of check into your office because you never really know who's got different people in different situations.
Yeah.
And we're able to pull something together kind of privately. Like I was helping sell a house and I knew these other people were selling a house and they're going to be vacant for a period of time. So I was able to kind of cobble it all together and help everyone win. But those are, we don't have a platform like you have.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the problem is, it's still a small amount that we get. We still want that 10% of the gross lease. And I don't know how that would work with your platform.
Yeah, I mean, so just on that, so right at this point, think of it as like a dating platform in the sense that we don't know what happens off platform. We're not controlling the entire transaction like an Airbnb does, which actually what makes our platform so attractive to most people, because we're not a stranglehold over the whole train. You have to go through us. We don't put the address on the site. Airbnb says they don't put the address on the website for privacy reasons. That's total bullshit. The reason why they don't put the address is because they don't want people going behind their backs to so we have the full address, it's all about transparency. And it would have to be between you as the broker, and we wouldn't probably get involved in that. We're not a broker. I'm a broker, but Lease Break's not a broker,
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna have to wrap it up. It's
Great.
5:14. I learned a lot. These are uncertain times, and I learned that I got to have a good insurer. And the other way to combat uncertainty is to have a Phil Horrigan and a lease break. If I've got to get out of my current situation and find my next situation. So
Awesome.
I think this worked out well. Thank you all for participating.
Thanks,
And,
everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you,
I'll
John.
have the video and the
Thanks,
podcast
all.
up in the next couple hours.
Great.
Thanks.
Great.
Thank you.
Take-
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.